So I'm Chris, here to talk about Ante, which is a DeFi project that we think has extensions beyond just DeFi. But right now, what we have is very simple. It's version 0.5. And so, first I'll go over what Ante is, then why it's useful, then the architecture behind it's very, very simple, and some sample tests. So to set the stage, DeFi has been growing very fast, and there are some breaking pains. We see a lot of crypto that is often put into DeFi smart contracts, lost, stolen, rugged, etc. And just between January and April this year, that's already $150 million. And so that's kind of scary. And one thing that we think about is we have all these smart contracts. They do some pretty cool stuff on chain, but where are all the smart tests for these smart contracts? A lot of testing when these smart contracts are written is really done off chain or with local forks of mainnet. And there are a lot of assumptions that aren't tested once smart contracts get put on chain, such as when you take inputs from other smart contracts, how do you know those inputs are good? How do you know that the way that you look at other oracles or reference other protocols is good? And what about the live economic assumptions that you make around the guarantees of your protocol? And so we kind of converged around this question of how do users of DeFi know what smart contract systems to trust? And how can protocols or DeFi teams better signal to users that they're aligned? Because one thing that's really interesting about building things on the blockchain is that everything is real-time auditable in some sense. And it's surprising that despite all the capital being put into these DeFi projects, there's not really clear ways of signaling to your users that you're truly aligned. And so Ante is a way to make stakeable on-chain tests. These tests, when you stake them as a protocol building something, are an easy way to signal alignment with the user. And for users and observers, it's a very simple way to measure what the general set of users of DeFi, how they are quantifying or measuring the trust in a particular system. And so one thing we want to clarify is that Ante is not a formal verification. One, there's not that much math in Ante. And second, formal verification is just a way to generate a math proof to show that some smart contract performs exactly as a spec has designated. But it doesn't say anything about the quality of the inputs. And it also doesn't say anything about more subjective economic guarantees. For example, when you have collateral in a DeFi protocol and you're lending out against that, formal verification can tell you that you're computing the collateral to debt in a certain way, but it doesn't tell you that the quality of your collateral is necessarily going to keep your protocol solvent. And Ante is also not a bug bounty in the sense that bug bounties are a way of facilitating trusted communication between people who identify exploits in the team, whereas we're building just simple stakeable on-chain tests that participants can either stake, meaning that they believe the test will always pass, or challenge, which means they believe that the test may fail in the near term. And so here's a really quick picture of kind of how the system works. On the left side, you have protocol teams or users who write and stake on-chain tests. On the right side, we have DeFi users or various hat wearers who the flow can go roughly when an Ante test is written. The protocol teams on the left side stake capital in the test, and if the test ever fails, there's a payout to challengers. And then similarly, when you challenge an Ante test, there's a block by block decay. That's a small fee paid to the stakers. And over time, that results in some kind of yield for the staking side. So I think I'll go real quick into just a quick Figma demo to give you guys a sense of what this looks like. So here's a really quick Figma demo. We have a leaderboard of tests. It's hard to read on the screen, but this particular one says a Uniflop token test. So if you were to go into it, Uniflop is it's not a decentralized exchange, but rather a protocol that might flop. And so you can see the purple line in our test view is kind of all of the crypto that's been staked behind this test, saying that this guarantee will never fail. And the red is kind of the challenger side, how much capital skeptics or critics have put. And we imagine that this interface should also have, we reference the Etherscan API, you kind of read through the code, and also you can look at the code of the Ante test. And then up here, it's really fuzzy on the projector, but we have a decentralized trust score computed, which is just an easy way to see what is the ratio of the capital on the staker side to the total capital put on both sides of the market. And the reason for putting that there is, one, it clarifies kind of how risky does the market think this particular test is. And then two, if you're building a very complex smart contract in DeFi where you want to perhaps park capital across one of 10 different protocols, you might want to look at what the decentralized trust score is before you just blindly throw money into there. And so to give you a sense of how this flow works, we connect our wallet here and we actually go and challenge a quarter ETH into this particular challenger pool. And so now we're active here. And for smart contracts, they can't poke themselves. So to know that a test has failed, a challenger needs to actually spend some gas to verify the test, which means poking the anti-test. And in this case, the anti-test has failed. And so we see up here, this guy has one ETH and change. When they go and claim the rewards, they now have 14 ETH here. So that was just to give you guys a real quick demo of how the flow works. And so now on to why Ante is useful. So on the protocol side, if you're building a DeFi protocol, Ante is a way to self-serve skin in the game as a marketing solution. You can just kind of show users that, hey, we've put some money behind our guarantees and here are our guarantees. Second, it's a credible commitment of those guarantees in the sense that it's trustless in the way that if someone identifies a corner case of your protocol that causes the test to fail, they can go and claim your stake directly. And then we believe that the practice of writing on-chain guarantees for on-chain smart contracts makes sense, because for other people building on your smart contracts, if you have your smart contract behind an own upgradable proxy and you change the behavior of certain functions, it makes sense that there should be some kind of test and some kind of guarantee around those. For users, we think that Ante is useful because there's this form of financial verification, where previously when I mentioned formal verification being math proof that your code behaves according to some spec, financial verification, we think of just some capital proof that people in general believe that this particular set of guarantees you've encoded in your anti-test are going to hold. It's not a proof by any means, but it is kind of like a signal that's useful to reference. And we also think that it's valuable to users because Ante creates more clarity around a number that can be assigned to, call it smart contract risk, or even smart contract risk for a system of smart contracts. And then finally, one thing we think is really interesting is that looking at the perspective of a challenger on these Ante pools, if you think about that position of being a challenger in an Ante pool, it's kind of an uncorrelated asset. And that's always an interesting thing when you can find uncorrelated assets in any market. And we think that, and then finally, one thing that we're really excited about is we think that Ante can bring a lot of value to the ecosystem. So one way we think about that is if you've heard the DeFi money Legos story, money Legos are really exciting because people build all these different pieces of the future of finance and then stack them up independently, permissionlessly. But one thing we think about is for the ETH money Lego in this giant stack or this castle you're building, if piece of I is the probability that there's some kind of smart contract failure, then parentheses 1 minus piece of I close parentheses raised to the nth power for like a stack of money Legos n deep gets very scary very fast. And we think that Ante can be used, each pool, to kind of bound that individual smart contract failure risk of each building block so that people can build with those building blocks more securely. Second, the decentralized trust score, we think exposing clarity around what the market thinks are specific ways smart contracts can fail, namely the chances or the estimate of that through this formula, which is basically a risk neutral estimate of this particular anti-test never failing going into the future. And then finally, we think that with Ante, the programmatic wrapping of different building blocks is possible. And so we think of Ante as it's this new explicit trust primitive. It's very simple, but we think that this is potentially the start of a way to turn all protocols and all things in DeFi and beyond DeFi too into better building blocks, because we can have each of these money Legos have an atomic native chain settled payout in case of specific types of failure. And so now we go over the Ante architecture. So we have a really simple interface that has kind of 5 different things to define, the author name, the test name, the protocol name, an array of contracts, and a Boolean function. And you can kind of do anything you want inside an Ante test, just a regular smart contract that conforms to this interface. We also have a abstract class that has some syntactic sugar, so it's a little bit faster to spin up an Ante test. And the way we imagine people deploying Ante tests is after you've put your Ante test on chain, you can use our interface and basically spin up an Ante pool from our Ante pool factory. And that way, the Ante pool is the contract that handles all the funds, and it's non-custodial, immutable. It handles the decay capture as well as the payout in the case of the Ante test failing. And so a couple design points for preventing generalized front running. On the challenger side, earlier in the demo, you saw that you had to click verify, and you get a bounty, an extra bounty of 5% if you're successful at verifying. One design choice we've made is that you must be a challenger for at least 12 blocks so that generalized front runners can't just scoop up your juicy verifier prize. And then on the staker side, one thing to prevent dishonest protocols from rugging even harder is that when you stake a particular Ante test, which we imagine the typical use case is a protocol staking their own tests, we require you to kind of unlock and have your capital at risk for a day before you can actually withdraw. And so the signal of a protocol kind of unlocking their own capital from their Ante pool, we imagine could be quite interesting to pay attention to. And so some other design details right now, the decay for being a challenger is about 20% a year. It's calculated 100 GWay per ETH per block. Sorry, not per year. And then in the future, we imagine that some percentage of that decay fee could go to the test author, which is pretty cool because that's potentially a way for Ante-test writers in a decentralized way to generate a passive income. And that's something that's very exciting. It could also, and we imagine that may have some implications for an Ante-DAO. Details to come. And so some real quick sample tests, no offense, Sina. We have an ETH dev doesn't rug test where we check the wallet of an EF wallet to make sure the Ethereum in there hasn't dropped by 99%. And we also have a couple simple tests here. For example, wrap Bitcoin doesn't exceed 21 million. And the one on the right was actually written by an Anon in our Discord. He checks or she checks that the DAI peg on, I think, I want to say Alchemix potentially holds. So, and so if you have any curiosities, we're at Ante.finance. And I guess some trivia, Ante is a backronym. It stands for Autonomous Native Testing Environment. And the name comes from kind of a statistical background, the ex-ante odds of something bad or good happening, as well as in poker, you ante up, you have a fair deposit to kind of play the game. And so for anyone curious, we have a type form at dev.ante.finance where you can sign up to write tests, get updates, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's Ante.
I didn't understand exactly where the money for the stakers who stake the money on the protocol who aren't the protocol comes from.
Yeah, so we think that one pattern we've noticed is that when new protocols start, there's oftentimes they'll have their Medium post talking about their tokenomics or their mechanism, and they'll be like, hey, here's our Uniswap address. If you LP here and stake your LP tokens with us, we'll give you some extra tokens. We imagine that in the future, protocols might want to launch with an Ante pool address as well, being like, hey, if you want to join us in backing our Ante pools, we might also throw you a bone. Another thing we think is possible is that investors that back protocols right now, it seems like a pretty common practice will be like, oh, the investor will try to buy $1 of your token and put $2 into your Uniswap pool as a guarantee. We imagine that in the future, maybe they put $1.50 into your Uniswap pool and 50 cents into your Ante pool. The idea being that the stakers of the Ante pool are taking on some synthetic risk to the smart contract system passing. And so right now, any new DeFi protocol, the users just bear all of that risk. And we think that a more efficient future might be maybe another party should take on some of that risk that's willing to for the right price. Good question, though. Go ahead.
One of the things that I think is interesting here is, obviously there are some ways for digital contracts to be bugged, but also like very specific like symphonies of contracts can fail like like the flash load stuff. And, you sort of look at it, it's like not exactly clear who like did the wrong thing, but like somehow the money got lost. I'm curious, like if you think that like the test can be broad enough to encapsulate the case where like a series of contracts interact in like a weird way.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that with sufficient time and energy, it's possible. I think to start, we'll be looking at kind of writing tests or getting tests written for really simple pieces. And the thinking is that not only can anti-tests be kind of unit tests for each components within a protocol, but they can also be integration tests by looking at outputs, for example, from multiple protocols. And so one of the things that we're hopeful for, optimistic for, is that we can have not only anti-tests on chain that guarantee a lot of local properties of different protocols, but then also anti-tests that can not only reference those tests, because the contracts, if they're view functions, it's really cheap to view. You can actually just have these like more complex anti-tests that are just looking at a symphony of other anti-tests, and themselves may also implement additional logic that kind of checks like A to B to C in this specific way goes well. There's the overall problem though, if you have too many n choose m anti-tests written for all these combinations, then you get a lot of fragmenting of liquidity. So that's another problem we'll have to solve over time. But I think directionally though, there's definitely something there.